Hello everyone, this is Tyler King with an episode of NuReview. A new episode of it, actually, thank you very much. And today I am going to do a review of an album that I was requested to do by my friend Megan, who knows that I am a very huge David Bowie fan, and so she's asked me not only just review your favorite David Bowie album, which is what I did with my Heaven or Las Vegas review for Cocteau Twins, but specifically she asked me to review Low, and Low is my favorite David Bowie album. I don't have it up here right now because I don't have it on vinyl record. I do have a CD of it. I don't know if you can see it very well. It's signed by Tony Visconti, who I met a couple of months ago after a performance by his band Holy Holy, where he and Spiders from Mars drummer Woody Woodmansey, they come out and they play the album The Man Who Sold the World from front to back, and then they do about 10 or 12 other David Bowie songs from that time, so like Changes and Ziggy Stardust and 5 Years. And you know, I told him when I met him how much I like this album, and he took it as a compliment. You know, he's Tony Visconti. He can do whatever he wants. He can, fart on an album and it's still going to sound good. So I'm going to set this guy up here, right there. Low is David Bowie's 11th album. It's released in January of 1977. The bulk of it is recorded throughout 1976, partly in Berlin, partly in France. It's the first part of what's referred to as Bowie's Berlin trilogy, following with Heroes and then Lodger. However, really only Heroes out of those three is recorded entirely in Berlin. It is produced by Tony Visconti, which I mentioned earlier. This is the third Bowie record produced by Visconti, the first one being 1970's The Man Who Sold the World, and the second being 1975's Young Americans. And despite the fact that Tony Visconti did not produce 1976's Station to Station, Low does follow in the same vein as Station to Station, especially from some of the more experimental songs like the title track, like TVC15, like Stay. But it does also very heavily follow in the footsteps of Iggy Pop's The Idiot album, which was released, I believe, in 1976. It is produced and co-written with David Bowie. Low is written during a period in David Bowie's life where he is trying to overcome his infamous cocaine addiction, and there is kind of an underlying sense of unease throughout the entire album, which especially is prominent on the second half of the album. And one of the things that I like so much about this album is that he's not presenting himself as a character. There's no Ziggy Stardust, there's no Halloween Jack, there is no Thin White Duke for him to kind of hide behind. Every word that he sings and every note that he plays is coming from David Bowie himself. And then, of course, just to get it out of the way that the album is sequenced is also unique for any other David Bowie album, in that the first half presented are the short, fragmented pop songs, and the second half of the album are these longer, ambient, slowly evolving pieces of music, most of which he does with Brian Eno. And so let's finally start talking about the songs on this album. The first one is Speed of Life. The song kind of fades in under these beeping synth sounds where we're introduced to the core players on the album, which is going to be Carlos Alomar on guitar, George Murray on bass, and Dennis Davis on drums. And the three of them launch us into this fun sounding instrumental jam. The song, though, it feels like we're only catching a fragment of the song, partly due to the fact that it fades in and it also fades out, but it's really short. It's a 2.5 minute long instrumental piece, and it just kind of feels like the band plays on and we're not going to be privy to that hearing it. There is some cool synth work going on by David Bowie himself as the song goes on, but this song, like a lot of other songs on this album, really feels like a showcase for the drum work of Dennis Davis. Following that, we have Breaking Glass, which opens with this very abrupt drum hit. Carlos Alomar starts playing this guitar line over it, and the song instantly draws you in. Lately, I've been breaking glass in your room again, sings Bowie once the vocals come in, and a lot of the lyrics on this album are going to be impressionistic. They are not going to be painting a complete picture like he did back on something like The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, or Aladdin Sane, or even Young Americans. There's some cool synth bleeps by Brian Eno that come in. They start in one speaker and they fade to the next, or vice versa. They come in 3 times on the song. But again, it's Dennis Davis on drums and George Murray on bass that really drive this song along. And like Speed of Life, I mean, this is barely a 2-minute long song. It does fade out again, and it doesn't feel like we're getting a complete picture of what the song is. Following that, we have What in the World, which opens with these very cartoony, almost like video game arcade-like synth bleeps, which does help to separate the song from the other ones on the album. And this song does feature vocals by Iggy Pop, and I would say backing vocals, but his vocals are mixed just about as loudly as Bowie's are on this song. The song, lyrically, it's kind of a love or lust song. Bowie's singing to this little girl with gray eyes, and probably my favorite part of the song is as Bowie sings "I'm in the mood for your love," Iggy Pop keeps popping up underneath him going, for your love, and it's just this very fun, awesome part of this song. As the song fades out, we're treated to some really killer guitar work by lead guitarist Ricky Gardner. But like the 2 songs we've already heard on this album, it does fade out once again. So far, it doesn't feel like we're getting the complete picture of what David Bowie is trying to show us. And there's no real closure to this unrequited love or lust. And following that, we have Sound and Vision, which is released as a single from the album, and it is the first complete sounding song on the album. While on Breaking Glass and What in the World, we were almost thrown straight into this song. On Sound and Vision, we're treated to this very rich, textured, lush instrumentation that lasts the better part of 90 seconds. It launches off with some snare hits, and Carlos and George and Dennis and Roy Young on guitar treat us to this very warm and welcoming instrumentation that draws you in. Bowie himself plays this very sweet sounding Chamberlin before Brian Eno and Mary Visconti sing their famous do-do-do part over it. And it's this very dramatic moment in the song. And then Bowie comes in and he says, "Don't you wonder sometimes about sound and vision?" Lyrically, Bowie is singing about how he's stuck in this room where there's nothing to do and he doesn't have much to say about it, and the blinds are drawn, and it makes me feel almost like he's singing about his coked out days living in Los Angeles in 1976. And we are treated again to another fade out in this song, but unlike the first few songs on this album, Sound and Vision does feel like a complete picture. Following that, we have Always Crashing in the Same Car, and this is going to really be the only slow song on the first side of the album. And immediately following Sound and Vision, the juxtaposition of the two makes this song all that more dramatic. And over this very heavily treated lead guitar and over these treated tapes by Brian Eno, David is telling us that really no matter what he does, he's always crashing in the same car, which is kind of his way of telling us that no matter what he does, he's always repeating himself over and over and over again. And he also relates a story of speeding through a hotel garage where he's almost reaching 90 miles per hour, and that lyric is pretty much about what he and Iggy Pop would do in Berlin in the late 70s, which would be go joyriding. The song Night Clubbing on Iggy Pop's The Idiot album is pretty much about the same scenario. And about a minute before the song, Bowie just lets out this wail that really drives home the loneliness and the desperation that he's trying to get across in this song. And going against the grain of what we've heard before, the song does not fade out. It does have a proper ending to it. Following Always Crashing in the Same Car, we have Be My Wife. And after the somber mood of the previous song, Be My Wife is one of the other singles released from the album. It opens with this rollicking piano line courtesy of Roy Young, and the song sees Bowie telling a potential life partner that he's lived all over the world and he's left every place before pleading with her to be his wife. And this is one of the longer songs on side A. There's this really blistering guitar solo by Ricky Gardner before Roy Young takes us out on this piano outro. And listening to this song, I mean, if I didn't know any better, I would think that Roy Young is Mike Garson. And Mike Garson was Bowie's longtime pianist. He did play on the albums Aladdin Sane, Outside, Earthling. And Mike Garson's playing, he comes from this very avant-garde school of piano playing, and that's what Roy Young's playing in the end of Be My Wife really reminds me of. And we're then given the last song on side A, A New Career in a New Town. Interesting to note is that side A is bookended by two instrumentals, the first one being Speed of Life and the second one being this song. It opens up with this very slow atmospheric feeling with Dennis Davis's kick drum underneath everything before the song explodes into this bright kaleidoscope of Roy Young's guitar playing and David Bowie's harmonica playing. And George Murray's bass playing on this song in particular is incredibly exceptional, and the way that it comes together with the guitar, with the drums, with the synths, with the harmonica and the piano, it really makes this one of my favorite songs on the album. I mean, when I hear this song, all I feel is pure joy. And like almost all the songs before it, this song does fade out, which is a fitting end to side A. And then there's side B. And in retrospect, you can prepare yourself for side B by reading reviews or Wikipedia or whatever. But I cannot imagine how it must have felt to have been a David Bowie fan in early 1977, hearing the first half of the album, or the first side of the album, and then flipping it over and hearing side B. And the reason why I say that is because the first song on side B, Warszawa, is basically a 6-minute long, slowly evolving ambient piece primarily composed by Brian Eno. There are these very deep, ominous piano chords that are played under this Moog synth. And the song has this very bleak, cold, industrialized feeling to it that just continues as the song goes on and on and on. And the song repeats itself instrumentally for the first 4 minutes or so before David Bowie starts singing, and when he does, he's not really singing any words. He's mainly using his voice as another instrument. And his vocals become much more frantic and much more dramatic, and it really adds to that sense of unease that the song has given us so far before he finishes. And the song repeats itself and then ends. And following that, we have Art Decade, which opens with this treated drum machine. There are these wailing synths in the background, and this song really does see David Bowie and Brian Eno working together. And because of the constant drum machine that is under the synths and the Chamberlin that we're going to be treated to, it doesn't feel as open and free as a song like Warszawa feels. It does still feel eerie, but it also feels very light and very airy, and it doesn't have the feeling of pessimism that we were treated to on the previous song. Following that, we have Weeping Wall, which is going to be the fastest song on side B, both in terms of instrumentation and actual tempo. It feels much more loose than the previous songs. Bowie is playing this very xylophone and vibraphone centric percussion, and he's playing them under these very frantic feeling piano stabs and synthesizer leads. And halfway through the song, he lets loose with this very atonal guitar solo, and he begins to wail underneath it, and the synth starts swelling up underneath it, and then the song ends. And finally, we have Subterraneans. And Subterraneans opens with this buzz sound effect before we're treated to these very slow, warm synthesizers that come into the song. George Murray graces us again. He's playing these very deep bass notes under this slowly enveloping synthesizer soundscape. Bowie lets out some very low moans underneath these very high synthesizer leads, and his moans start becoming multi-tracked before he plays the saxophone solo, which he just lets loose, and it gives this feeling of sadness and loss to the song that kind of juxtaposes the warm, welcoming feeling that we've had so far in this song. Again, he starts singing the gibberish non-language that he sang on Warszawa, but on this song, just the way he sings them and just the dedication and the emotion that he's trying to present on this song, every time I hear it, it makes the hairs on my arms stand up. Following that, he continues the torment-feeling saxophone solo before he moans underneath it a final time, and he sustains the last saxophone note for a couple of seconds before the song ends, and that's low. In talking about this album, I feel like there's not enough that I can say about this album. This was the first David Bowie album that I ever heard from front to back. I had downloaded his discography one day. This was when I was maybe 17. And I already knew some of his glam material, Rebel Rebels, Iggy Stardust, and I already knew his 80s output, China Girl, Let's Dance, Modern Love. And in reading about his discography, I stumbled upon the Berlin period and how a lot of people really held that period up as a innovative time in David Bowie's musical career. And so I asked one of my best friends, Jen, which one to listen to first, just based off of the titles, Low, Heroes, and Lodger. And she said, Low sounds the most interesting based on the title alone. And I mentioned this same phrase when I did my review of Gary Numan's The Pleasure Principle album, and that is that I cannot remember very, very, very many other listening experiences that affected me as much as listening to Low for the first time. And it really, it completely opened up my eyes to the world of David Bowie. I mean, before then, I had listened to a lot of bands that were directly or indirectly influenced by him, bands like The Cure and Susie and the Banshees. And to finally hear an album by him from front to back, and to have it be one that I enjoy so much, I mean, I can't describe it. Like, it was a perfect listening experience. And in trying to talk about how much this album means to me, it's like talking about how much air means to you or water means to you. I can't think of another single album, Pleasure Principle included, that has influenced my listening as much as Low has. And David Bowie always was ahead of his time. And I feel like Low in particular is one of those albums that was 2 or 3 years ahead of its time. I feel like without Low, you don't have anything like synth pop. You don't have the rise of electronic music like you do in the 80s. I mean, sure, there were bands like Kraftwerk who were doing it, but Kraftwerk were mainly, at that time at least, unknown. And the production by Tony Visconti especially, it makes the album feel incredibly rich and incredibly detailed and incredibly textured. And it's kind of a weird juxtaposition of the cold feeling that would be presented on the following album, Heroes, which would have really the same players that are on Low. And I know that there's an argument to be made that Heroes is, of David Bowie's late 70s period, that Heroes is the best album of that period. But while Heroes does have the infamous title track on it, there's not too many other songs on that album that I find myself going back to. I mean, as a whole, I do enjoy the Heroes album a lot, but Low is just great song after great song after great song. And it's to the point where if I had to choose a favorite and least favorite song off of this album, I literally cannot. Because every song complements the one immediately before it and immediately after it. And this album makes me feel, I mean, I can't, it makes me feel happy, it makes me feel sad, it makes me feel melancholic, it makes me feel together. And I mean, I can go on and on and on and on and on about how much I love this album. But this is, to me, I mean, I would even go so far as to say this is probably one of the greatest albums ever made. You can make an argument against it however much you want, but you're wrong. Because if looking at what Bowie does immediately after this album and the state of popular music immediately after this album, you cannot tell me that this is not one of the most influential pieces of music that has ever been recorded. And a lot of props also have to be given to David Bowie's band at the time, especially the core unit of Carlos Alomar, of George Murray, and of Dennis Davis. And rest in peace, Dennis Davis. He did recently pass away, as did David Bowie, which is something that I'm probably never going to get over. You know, you can't. But listening to this album, it makes, it makes me feel like he's alive again. And that's what matters. And if I had to give this album a rating, a 10 out of 10 isn't doing it justice. It's so beyond that. It's beyond being able to put a numerical number on it, or being able to give it a letter grade or a percentage. I mean, this is a perfect album. from front to back. There's not one note on here that is out of place, and this is one of those albums where every single time I hear it, I hear something that I didn't hear before. And so, thank you Tony, thank you Carlos and George and Dennis and Roy and Ricky and Brian, but most of all, thank you David Bowie for making this album. Thought I wasn't going to be able to make it through without crying, but I guess I was. So up next, I'm going to be doing a review of Strange Charm by Gary Numan. I'm going to be continuing my Gary Numan album reviews. But in the meantime, this is Low. This is David Bowie's Low. And if you haven't heard this album, you need to hear this album. I can't say much else about it. Tyler King. The NuReview, David Bowie's Low, masterpiece, greatest album ever made, I would go so far as to say.